Okay, guys, sorry, I got cut off there. But the important details of the story you just listed, use them to write the story's main idea on the following lines. Again, I said the main idea of the story is that Toby did not know his grandfather, but after talking to him, he starts to get to know him. Tip 5 says summarize the events in the passage so the main idea is easier to find. When you summarize the events in the passage, you tell its most basic ideas. You describe the events in sequence. Sequence is the order in which things happen. Retelling allows you to see the most important parts of the passage more easily, including the main idea and the details that support that idea. Number 9 says, look back to the story Gramps and Me. Which of the following provides the best summary? A. Gramps comes to live with Toby and his family when the boy is 10 and Gramps is 80. Most of the time, Gramps sits around wearing a cowboy hat and whittling a stick. B. Gramps is 80 years old when he moves in with 10-year-old Toby and the boy's family. After Gramps starts telling Toby stories about his life, they begin to enjoy each other's company. C. Toby's grandfather once lived in the mountains. He and his wife Clara lived in a tent and panned for gold. They never got rich, but they made enough money to get to their next adventure. Or D. Toby's grandfather once had a horse named Paloma. During the first week that Gramps stays with Toby and the boy's family, Gramps carves the figure of Paloma's head onto a stick. So we have to ask ourselves, which one of these choices best summarizes the story from start to finish? Now remember, a summary is a much shorter version of the story. So, which one of these starts at the beginning and goes to the end and doesn't leave out anything? If you look at A, the reason it's not A is because it stops at Gramps sits around wearing a cowboy hat and whittling a stick. Is that how the story ends? No, it's not. So therefore, it doesn't have anything to do with the ending, so that can't be the answer. So we're going to mark out A. B, it could be B. It says Gramps is 80 years old when he moves in. After Gramps starts telling Toby stories about his life, they begin to enjoy each other's company. That tells the story from start to finish. So it could possibly be B. C, Toby's grandfather once lived in the mountains. He and his wife Clara lived in a tent. They never got rich. This isn't really telling this particular story. This is telling the story of Toby's grandfather and his wife Clara. So this can't be it either because it's not summarizing the passage that we're reading here today called Gramps and Me. And D, this one talks about Toby's grandfather's horse, and during that first week that Gramps stays with Toby, Gramps carves the figure of Paloma's head onto a stick. Well, is this giving us the most important details that happened in the story? No. It's leaving out some really important parts. So the answer to this is B. Gramps is 80 years old when he moves in with 10-year-old Toby and the boy's family. After Gramps starts telling Toby stories about his life, they begin to enjoy each other's company. Number 10. Number 10 says, describe 2 ways that Toby gets to know his grandfather. Use information from the story in your answer. So we have to think to ourselves, okay, how does Toby get to know his grandfather? And there are 2 ways that stick out to me from the passage. The first one is that he realizes how talented his grandfather is. And he gets to know him by watching him whittle and by seeing what he's making as he's whittling. This shows Toby that his grandfather is very talented. And that's something that he didn't know about his grandfather before. The second way he gets to know Toby is when they actually have a conversation. He gets to know him when his grandfather starts telling him stories about when he was panning for gold with his wife and his horse and his life in the mountains. So the 2 ways he gets to know his grandfather is by, first of all, watching and observing as he whittles. He learns that he's talented. And secondly, by listening to his stories about his life. So again, I'm going to answer in complete sentences. I'm going to restate the question. Toby gets to know his grandfather by watching him whittle. I don't want to spell whittle wrong. By watching him whittle. And by having conversations with him. Okay, so he gets to know his grandfather by watching him whittle and by having conversations with him. Tip 6. Put together clues from the passage to make inferences. Hidden messages are like mysteries. If you have only one clue, they're hard to figure out. The more clues you have, the easier it is to solve the mystery. In a reading passage, the details are the clues. In a made-up story, these details include what the characters say and do. In an article, my light went off again. Hold on a minute. Can you see if you can make the light turn on? In an article about true events, the clues are facts about real people and real events. When you make an inference, you gather all the clues from the passage and combine them with what you already know to figure out that hidden meaning. Answer numbers 11 and 12 to make an inference about how Toby feels when his grandfather first comes to stay. So we're wanting to know how Toby feels, but not just how he feels. We're asking how he feels when his grandfather first comes to stay. That's an important word, when he first comes to stay. Okay, so we're going to look back at the passage. It says, go back to the story and underline any clues that tell what Toby thinks about Gramps when he first arrives. So let's go back and look at the passage. We actually already highlighted some of these. It says, he was a stranger to me. So that's one way he felt. He's a stranger. He didn't know him. When Gramps showed up, I was surprised. So he's feeling a little bit of shock, a little bit of surprise. He seemed too young to be 80. There's another way he felt about him. He's like, whoa, he looks too young to be 80 years old. And then the other thing it says is his hat looked too big for him. So he's not so sure about him. He looks too young to be 80. His hat looks too big for him. And it says he whittled away the hours. Whittled away the hours. So these are some clues that tell us how Toby feels about his grandfather whenever he first arrives. And number 12, what does Toby think about Gramps when he first arrives? So let's look at the choices. He is a close friend who tells interesting stories. Now again, we're looking at when he first arrives, okay? So did Toby think of him as a close friend when he first arrived? No, he said he was a stranger. If you'll remember, that sentence that we highlighted said he was a stranger to Toby. So no, he was not a close friend when he first arrived. B, he looks young and wastes his time whittling. Okay, did it say he looked young? Yes. Did it say he spent hours whittling? Yes. So could that be it? Maybe. Let's look at the next one. C, he is talented at carving but a little scary. Does it ever say he's scary? I think scary is a bit of a strong word, and I don't remember him ever saying that he was scary. So I don't think it's going to be C. He does not belong here with Toby's family. Again, that's some strong words. In the passage, Toby doesn't really say he doesn't belong. So I don't think that's going to be the correct answer either. He looks young and wastes his time whittling is going to be the best answer for how Toby feels about his grandfather. Okay, next page. Tip 7. Draw conclusions based on what you have read. After you have made inferences, you can come to a final decision about what you have read. The decision you make is called a conclusion. When you draw a conclusion, think carefully about the inferences you made and other details you have gathered from the passage. Then decide what else must be true. Something in the passage must help to explain your decision. By putting together your inferences and important details from the passage, you can draw a reasonable conclusion about what you've read. Number 13. How does Toby feel about Gramps at the beginning of the story? How do you know? So this goes along with the questions that we just answered about how he feels when his grandfather first gets there at the beginning of the story. I'm going to answer in complete sentences. At the beginning of the story, Toby is unsure. I think unsure is a good word to describe how Toby's feeling about his grandfather. Never said he was scared, never said he didn't belong, but I think unsure is a good word to describe. He's not so sure about his grandfather. At the beginning of the story, Toby is unsure about his grandfather. And then it says, how do you know? In the passage it says, he looked too young. His hat seemed too big. And he spent hours whittling. Okay. So at the beginning of the story, Toby's unsure about his grandfather. In the passage it says he looked too young, his hat seemed too big, and he spent hours whittling. Tip number 8. The theme of the passage connects the story to the reader. Once you know the main idea, it becomes easier to determine the theme. Again, we talked about how the main idea and theme are different. They're not the same. The theme is an idea that is important for all people, not just those in the passage. You can think of the theme as the lesson the author wants readers to learn. The author doesn't usually say exactly what the theme is. You have to figure it out on your own. For example, you probably know Aesop's fable about the race between the tortoise, the turtle, and the hare, the rabbit. The theme of that fable is this lesson. We can succeed against great odds if we try very hard. So number 14, what important lesson does Toby learn in the story? A, living a life of excitement and adventure can be difficult. B, whittling is an easy hobby that anyone can do. C, taking time to get to know someone can be rewarding. D, mining for gold is hard work. Let's take a look. A, living a life of excitement and adventure can be difficult. Is that true? Yes, that's true. Living a life of excitement and adventure can be difficult. But do you think that's what the story is mostly about? The lesson that Toby learns in this story? I don't think so. B, whittling is an easy hobby that anyone can do. I don't think that's really what it's saying in the passage. It says grandfather spent hours whittling. And I think it takes pretty great talent to be able to whittle into wood. So I don't think that is A, true, and B, it's really not the lesson that Toby's learning in the story. C, taking time to get to know someone can be rewarding. Is that a lesson that Toby learns in the story? Yes, he gets to know his grandfather, and it's rewarding because he starts learning all these interesting and great things about him and his grandmother. So it might be C. D, mining for gold is hard work. Is that true? Yes, mining for gold is probably hard work. But is that the lesson that Toby's learning in this story? No. So the answer is going to be C. Taking time to get to know someone can be rewarding. All right, that's it for Gramps and me. And then this is our last passage for this lesson. So, kick me, I'm a football. By Rick Zolo. Some people call me a pigskin, but I'm not made out of a pig. My cousins, the baseball, the basketball, and the soccer ball, are made in other countries. I'm made here in the United States, in the small town of Ada, Ohio. What am I? Okay, so you read the title. I'm a football. But do you know how I'm made? I'm made from cowhide rather than pigskin, and I'm cut from a pattern. The cowhide is just the outer layer. I have an inner lining made of plastic. At one time, our insides were made from pigs. That's how people came up with the name pigskin. Once my inside and outside are formed, the two linings are stitched together and filled with air. That's when I really start to look like a football. All the footballs used in the National Football League, or the NFL, are made in Ada. To make it to the NFL, we have to be perfect. If we're a little less than perfect, we get sold to you, the regular customer. We've got to be the best to play with the big boys. It's a big responsibility being an NFL football. To be considered perfect, we're put through a series of demanding tests, one after another. A worker fills us with air several times to make sure we don't leak. Another worker checks our seams to see that they're straight. If we're going to the NFL, we're required to be double-laced for strength. After all, if some 300-pound guy is going to jump on you, 2 laces are better than 1. If we go to sporting goods stores, we get laced only once. When we're sold, either to the NFL or to you, the regular customer, we're ready to be passed, handed off, and yes, kicked. I want to make it to the NFL, but I'll be just as grateful if I go to one of you. I might even have more fun playing in somebody's backyard than in some stadium. Wherever I go, I'm proud to be a football. So go ahead, kick me. Okay, number 1. What is this passage mostly about? Okay, this keyword right here is mostly. We want to make sure we pick the answer that is what the passage is mostly about. A, all NFL footballs are made in the same town. Now, remember, just because it's true doesn't mean it's the answer. So are all NFL footballs made in the same town? They're all made in Ada, Ohio. But is that what the passage is mostly about? I would say no. There's more to the passage than just that. B, perfectly made footballs go to the NFL, and the rest go to stores. How about that one? Okay, yes, that's a good one for what the passage is mostly about. Should I go ahead and select it, or should I read the other choices first? I think I should read the other choices first. Footballs are called pigskins, even though they are made from cowhide. Again, is that true? Yes. But is that what this passage is mostly about, how they're called pigskins? No. That's just a little fact. And D, most footballs made for the NFL go to sporting goods stores. I don't really think that's true. Most footballs made for the NFL go to the NFL. The ones that are not go to sporting goods stores. So I think that the answer here is B. Perfectly made footballs go to the NFL, and the rest go to the stores. Number 2, what tests are used to decide whether a football is perfect? Write your answer in the form of a summary. Okay, so we have to go back to the passage and look. What tests are used to decide whether a football is perfect? Okay, so I'm going to look here. It says to be considered perfect, we're put through a series of demanding tests, one after another. Again, this is the topic sentence for this paragraph. That's what this paragraph is going to be about. So this is where I need to look. A worker fills us with air several times to make sure we don't leak. There's the first test. So I'm going to highlight that. Okay, next, another worker checks our seams to see that they're straight. Okay, there's another test. If we're going to the NFL, we're required to be double-laced for strength. Okay, so the next one is that they have to be double-laced. After all, if some 300-pound guy is going to jump on you, 2 laces are better than 1. If we go to sporting goods stores, we get laced only once. So there are the 3 tests that they must do for a football to pass to go to the NFL. They are filled with air several times to make sure they don't leak. A worker checks the seams to make sure that they're straight. And all the NFL balls are double laced. So those are the 3 things that they do. So, in order to test if a football is perfect, a worker fills the ball with air several times. I'm probably going to run out of room to make sure it doesn't leak. Another worker, let's go ahead and make this a new sentence. Another worker checks the seams to make sure they're straight. And finally, they are double laced for strength. Okay, there we go. In order to test if a football is perfect, a worker fills the ball with air several times to make sure it doesn't leak. Another worker checks the seams to make sure they are straight. And finally, they are double laced for strength. I'm going to take this "and" out of here and just say "finally." That way I'm not starting a sentence with "and." Finally, they are double laced for strength. Number 3. Which sentence from the passage supports the idea that few footballs make it to the NFL? A. Once my inside and outside are formed, the 2 linings are stitched together and filled with air. We've got to be the best to play with the big boys. A worker fills us with air several times to make sure we don't leak. I might even have more fun playing in somebody's backyard than in some stadium. These are all pieces of text evidence, which means each one of these sentences is from the passage. But we have to ask ourselves, which sentence from the passage best supports the idea that few footballs make it to the NFL? The word here is few. Few means not very many. Okay? So once my inside and outside are formed, the 2 linings are stitched together and filled with air. Does that show that not very many footballs make it to the NFL? No, that really has nothing to do with it. So I'm going to cross that one out. We've got to be the best to play with the big boys. Does this one show that only a few make it to the NFL? Maybe. You have to be the best to make it? That means that probably not everybody's going to make it. In fact, not very many people are going to make it if you have to be the best. So we'll leave that one and we'll go on. C. A worker fills us with air several times to make sure we don't leak. Does that show that few footballs make it to the NFL? No. So it's not C. And D. I might even have more fun playing in somebody's backyard than in some stadium. Does that show that few footballs make it to the NFL? No. So the answer is B. We've got to be the best to play with the big boys. Number 4. What kinds of layers are used to make a football? Well, again, let's take a look back in the passage. What kinds of layers? Okay, so I'm going to try to find the paragraph that talks about the layers. This one's giving clues about what the passage is about. This one, let's see. I'm made from cowhide rather than pigskin, and I'm cut from a pattern. The cowhide is just the outer layer. Oh, here we go. We're talking about the layers now. The cowhide is just the outer layer. Okay, there's one layer. I have an inner lining made of plastic. There's another layer. At one time, our insides were made from pigs. That's how people came up with the name pigskin. Once my inside and outside are formed, the two linings are stitched together and filled with air. That's when I really start to look like a football. Okay, so we found our two layers. And it says what kinds of layers. So the first layer of a football is, it says cowhide. So it is made from cowhide. The second layer is, and in the passage it says, made of plastic. Okay, so the first layer of a football is made from cowhide. The second layer is made of plastic. So, next page. And this is our last page for this lesson. Read the following sentence from the passage. It says, I'm made from cowhide rather than pigskin, and I'm cut from a pattern. Which of the following meanings of pattern is used in this sentence? Let's take a look at the choices. A cloth with a repeating picture printed on it. B, a set of matching dishes and silverware. C, the flight path used to land an airplane. D, a guide used to make each item the same. So this passage is talking about making footballs, and it says I'm made from a cowhide rather than a pigskin, and I'm cut from a pattern. Only one of these definitions of the word pattern matches with what they're talking about in this passage. So is it A, a cloth with a repeating picture printed on it? Are they talking about a cloth here that has the same picture printed on it over and over again? No. So the answer is not A. A set of matching dishes and silverware. That has nothing to do with what we're talking about in this passage. So we know it's not B. The flight path used to land an airplane. Again, that has nothing to do with what we're talking about. We're not talking about airplanes, we're talking about footballs. D, a guide used to make each item the same. Do you think that's what they're talking about when they're saying they're cut from a pattern? Yes, they want to make sure that each piece is exactly the same, so they use a pattern. So D is the answer. Number 6, what is one way a football can be less than perfect? Okay, we're going to need to go back to the passage for this one to see what are some ways that a football can be less than perfect. Okay, so let's take a look. This first paragraph again is about, they're trying to make us guess what the passage is about. We know it's about a football. Okay, then it talks about the layers. So this paragraph is about the layers of a football and what it's made of. This paragraph is talking about how all the footballs used for the NFL are made in the same town. In order to make it, they have to be perfect. This one says what you have to be able to do to be considered perfect. Okay, you have to make sure you don't leak. You have to make sure the seams are straight. They have to be double laced. Okay, the last paragraph talks about, it's basically just wrapping up the passage. They're either sold to the NFL or to the regular customer. And then the football's talking about how, I would like to maybe be just a regular football too. So the best paragraph for us to look at is going to be this one right here. It tells us what they have to do to make sure it's perfect for the NFL. And our question says, what is one way a football can be less than perfect? So one way would be maybe if it leaks air. Another would be if the seams aren't straight. If it's only single laced. So we only have to put one of those. So I'm going to say if the seams are not straight. One way a football can be less than perfect is if the seams are not straight. Now, if you put that they leak air or if they're not double laced, either one of those can count as well. It just said we have to put one, so that's the one that I chose. What is the last step in making a football? A pattern is cut from a cowhide. B, an inner lining is made out of plastic. C, the two linings are filled with air. D, the inner and outer linings are sewed together. We're going to have to go look at that passage that talks about how to make a football. Okay, and the question's asking, what is the last step? So, the cowhide is the outer layer. The inner lining is made of plastic. Then it says, once my inside and outside are formed, the two linings are stitched together first and then filled with air. So let's take a look here. Which one is the last step? A pattern is cut from a cowhide? No, that's one of the first steps. An inner lining is made out of plastic? No. The two linings are filled with air? Maybe. The inner and outer linings are sewed together. Well, it says in the passage, they are sewed together, stitched together, and then filled with air. So, filled with air is the last step in making a football. So the answer is C. And finally, number 8, according to the passage, footballs are put through a series of demanding tests. What does the word series mean? Okay, let's think about it. Footballs are put through a series of demanding tests. Let's see where it says that. Here it says, to be considered perfect, we're put through a series of demanding tests, one after another. So, remember how we've talked about context clues? If you don't know what a word means, look for those clues in the passage. Here are some perfect clues. One after another. So it's like steps. It's one after another. A series of tests is one test after another. So, series means, in this passage, series means one after another. Okay? And that is the end of Lesson 3, Main Idea and Details. Tomorrow we will be doing Lesson 4, Getting the Most from What You Read. Thank you for following along.